Thanks for joining me on Global News in Zuma, Nigeria. We begin with Australian court rejects Moscow's bid to stop embassy eviction. Still, Australia announces fresh $74 million aid to Ukraine. North Korea holds rallies condemning imperialist US. Moscow aims to control Wagner as Ukraine alleges gain. And 50 years after Vietnam War ended, its bombs still kill. Stay with me for this and more stories. On politics in Australia, a court sitting in Australia has dismissed a Russian claim to stop its eviction from a site in Canberra where it has been blocked from building its new embassy. On June 15th, the government introduced new legislation to end the Russian lease on the land, which is about 400 meters, 437 yards from Parliament House, after intelligence agencies cautioned the location was a threat to national security. Russia, which took out the lease in 2008 but had not completed any buildings there, then launched a last-ditch legal bid to try and stop its eviction, and a man was seen squatting at the site. High Court Justice Jane Jacot on Monday described Russia's challenge on constitutional grounds to the law terminating the lease as weak and difficult to understand. The squatter, who Russia's lawyer Elliot Hyde said was a security guard, was seen leaving the fenced-off compound soon afterwards and was then driven away in a vehicle with diplomatic license plates. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said, according to reports, that the court has made clear that there is no legal basis for a Russian presence to continue on the site at this time. We expect the Russian Federation to act in accordance with the court's ruling. Russia bought the lease to the land from the Australian government in 2008 and secured approval to build its new embassy there in 2011. The Russian embassy did not immediately respond to the decision. Earlier, Russia has accused Australia of Russophobic hysteria for cancelling the lease. The present Russian embassy is the former Soviet embassy in the Canberra suburb of Griffith, and its operations are unaffected. Talking Russia-Ukraine war, still Australia is one of the biggest non-NATO contributors to Ukraine, is to send an additional 70 military vehicles to Ukraine as part of its newest military support package for the country. Anthony Albanese, Prime Minister, announced the 110 million Australian dollars, that's $73.5 million package on Monday, and said, according to reports, that the plan had been under consideration before the weekend's uproar in Russia. The package will include 28 M113 armored vehicles, 14 special operation vehicles, 28 medium trucks, and 14 trailers, as well as an additional supply of 105 artillery ammunition. Australia is unwavering in our resolve to condemn and oppose Russia's actions to help Ukraine achieve victory, Albanese said. Defense Minister Richard Marles said he was proud of the additional support Australia was offering. We expect this to be a protracted conflict, and so we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, he added. The package, which did not include the Hercules armored patrol vehicles or more Bushmaster infantry vehicles requested by Kyiv, comes as Ukraine continues a counteroffensive to push Russian forces from areas they have occupied in the east of the country. A spokesperson for Ukraine's Eastern Military Command, Serhiy Shevardnadze, said the military progressed at least 600 meters, 1,970 feet over the former day near Bakhmut, a city taken by Wagner forces in May after months of fighting. The Russian Defense Ministry said there had been at least 10 attacks in that area, which they prevented. Australia will also extend duty-free access for goods imported from Ukraine for an extended 12 months to support its recovery and trade opportunities, the statement said. The additional commitments take Australia's total contribution to support Ukraine to 790 million Australian dollars, that's $529 million, just over three-quarters of it in military assistance. However, there will be an extra 10 million Australian dollars, $6.7 million for the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund, a United Nations-led fund to meet the urgent needs of millions of Ukrainian civilians caught up in the conflict. Penny Wong, Foreign Minister, says supporting Ukraine was important because the principle that a large country cannot change the borders of another country matters to us all. She said that was something she had emphasized to counterparts in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, according to reports. Again on politics, North Korea has held mass rallies in Pyongyang criticizing the imperialism of the United States and vowing a war of revenge as the country marked the 73rd anniversary of the outbreak of the Korean War. Around 120,000 young people and workers took part in the rallies, which were held across the capital, reports said on Monday. The secretaries of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea also attended. According to footages, the stadium crowded with people, several of them wearing white shirts. Some were marching and punching the air with their right hands. Others were holding placards reading, "The whole U.S. mainland is within our shooting range, and the imperialist U.S. is the destroyer of peace." On June 25, 1950, the Korean War started when North Korea invaded South Korea in an attempt to reunite the Korean peninsula under Pyongyang. The invasion led to a 3-year war pitting Soviet and China-backed northern forces against US-led United Nations troops that killed approximately 2 million people rather. Sunday's anniversary of the war, which ended in a truce rather than a peace treaty, follows a flurry of weapons testing by nuclear-armed North Korea, including an attempt to put its first military spy satellite into orbit. That effort ended in failure on May 31st, but Pyongyang has promised to make a second launch attempt at an unspecified date. North Korea now had the strongest absolute weapon to punish the U.S. imperialists, and the Avengers on this land are burning with the indomitable will to revenge the enemy, reports said. This year's spate of weapons testing included Pyongyang's first solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile as leader Kim Jong-un steps ahead with his plan to modernize the military and advance an ever more powerful arsenal of weapons. Kim has justified the build-up as essential for North Korea's self-defense, pointing to military exercises held by South Korea and the United States. North Korea asserted that the U.S. was making desperate attempts to ignite a nuclear war and accused Washington of sending strategic assets to the region in a separate foreign ministry report. Denuclearization talks have been delayed since 2019, when a high-profile summit between Kim and then U.S. President Donald Trump collapsed over sanctions. Now, the world just got a clue of an enticing but possibly even more dangerous future without Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Western stakes in the Ukraine war rose significantly as a result. A revolutionary weekend that saw Yevgeny Prigozhin, mercenary chief, blatantly mock the Kremlin before aborting his march on Moscow suggested Russia's blood-soaking history of revolutions and coups. Meanwhile, efforts by the White House and its foreign allies to find out precisely what was going on underline the volatile nature of a war that could rewrite the map of Europe and modern history. Ultimately, a civil war that seemed about to burst out was prevented, at least for now. The Kremlin strongman seemed to blink at a military confrontation with Prigozhin's Wagner Group fighters in an act that might preserve his hold on power, but Prigozhin's defiance and the retreat by Putin, who accused him of treason but then agreed to a deal to let him apparently escape to exile in Belarus hours later, pierced the deepest holes in the Russian president authority in a generation in power. There's now no doubt that the war Putin unleashed to wipe Ukraine off the map poses an existential threat to his political survival. The rest of the war must now deal with the implications. This is not a 24-hour blip. It's like Prigozhin is the person who looked behind the screen at the Wizard of Oz and saw the great and terrible Oz was just this little frightened man. Former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, John Harbus, said, according to reports, that Putin has been diminished for all time by this affair. Divisions in Moscow and between the government and Prigozhin's Wagner Group, the only Russian fighting force that has enjoyed much recent battlefield success, might also now raise an opening for Ukraine, which wants breakthroughs against Moscow's already demoralized and poorly led forces in its new counteroffensive. This will be good news for the West, which has backrolled and armed the country's fight for its life. And there's no doubt that NATO leaders would love to see Putin gone, since there's no indication he will end the war by calling off his troops out of Ukraine. For a time, it appeared that a teetering autocrat, Russia's military and rival militia chiefs might end up in a civil war for control of a nation with a vast nuclear arsenal. Such instability and internal strife in Russia will send geopolitical shockwaves across the globe. The West honestly doesn't have a side in the internal conflict that broke out this weekend. This was a showdown between Prigozhin, whose men are accused of brutal human rights abuses in Ukraine, Syria, and Africa, and Putin, who has revived World War II-style horror in Europe, who disobeyed international law by invading a sovereign neighbor and who faces an arrest warrant for alleged war crimes. Prigozhin also has been no friend to the U.S. He has admitted to interfering in American polls and vowed to do so again. Statements by Western leaders that this was an internal Russian matter reflected a desire to deny Putin a pretext to renew his claims that he's a victim of a Western plot to overthrow him and suppress Russia's dignity as a major power, and to trim its geopolitical sphere of influence. According to reports that in telephone conversations with the leaders of France, Britain and Germany, Biden stressed the need to keep the temperature low and to allow whatever was happening in Russia to play out in keeping with his mantra to prevent World War III. And while it's possible to crack in, the Putin regime could presage an eventual collapse that might remove one of Washington's major foreign policy challenges, a new Cold War-style standoff with Russia. No one in Washington is betting on it. The U.S. carried out over 1 million bombing attacks during the 20-year conflict, dropping some 5 million tons of ordnance on the Southeast Asian country. About a third of the munitions, including cluster bombs, did not explode on effect. It has now been over 50 years since the last U.S. soldier left Vietnam on March 29, 1973, but tens of thousands of explosives are still being found each year, often mere inches beneath the soil. In Quang Tri province, which was once divided by the demilitarized zone between North and South Vietnam and remains the most heavily contaminated province in the country, there have been 3,500 deaths from accidents since the war ended. The last death was in 2022 when a bomb exploded in a farmer's hands after he discovered it in the field and picked it up. The Mines Advisory Group, MAG, a United Kingdom-based NGO that has been working in Vietnam since 1999 and now employs 735 people in the country, came to remove the bomb in Sai's garden after he called a local hotline. Every day, MAG staff scour the landscape with metal detectors searching for unexploded ordnance, UXO, to clear so the land can be made safe and ready for agriculture or development. In 2022, MAG destroyed 14,615 bombs, clearing just more than 10 square kilometers, that's 3.86 square miles of land. A group of local children aged between 8 and 12 were playing near a muddy ditch when they came across an unusual-looking object in the near Juan Vien village. Trat Duve, the village head, said according to reports that the children had finished playing football and thought they might catch some fish instead. They found an explosive, picked it up and passed it around. Vin said they didn't know what it was. He immediately called a government-run hotline which permits local authorities to ask organizations like MAG as well as the Vietnamese military to clear UXO. Everyone around here has the number, he said. Din Ngoc Vu, the vice director of the government-run Kiang Tribe Mine Action Center, QTMAC, which operates the hotline, said, "I think this work has helped to heal the wounds of the war from both perspectives." Between 1993 and 2020, the U.S. invested over $166 million into programs in Vietnam, focusing on war legacy issues such as clearing mines and UXO and providing explosive ordnance risk education. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, during an official visit to Vietnam in April, said Washington was committed to tackling the legacies of the war. Internal NGOs and the Vietnamese military have already cleared UXO from 173 square kilometers, 67 square miles of land. QTMAC estimates that it will take 30 more years to clear the province of explosives. On more stories, chaos erupts after polls in Sierra Leone. On Sunday evening, Sierra Leonean police announced that they had used tear gas canisters to scatter opposition supporters in Freetown the day after the presidential election, which passed off generally peacefully and is still being counted. The major opponent, Sumara Kamara, of incumbent President Julius Maada Bio in the election, said on Twitter that bullets had been fired at his party's headquarters in the capital. Sidi Yaya Tunis, the spokesman for All People's Congress, APC, Mr. Kamara's party, said that a woman died in the incident. She was on the first floor in the medical unit. She is a nurse. We have a small dispensary in our headquarters where she was working, he said Sunday evening on the announcement, which could not be immediately verified. Freetown Mayor Yvonne Aki Sawyer, also an APC official, posted photos on Twitter of the interior of the formation's headquarters, showing people shielding themselves by lying on the ground. We have the APC headquarters on the fire, she wrote. Police said APC members were protesting in Freetown, announcing to the public that they have won the elections in a statement, according to reports on Sunday evening. These demonstrators attracted outside the APC headquarters a crowd of supporters who started causing trouble to passers-by, it explained in the statement. When the situation became unbearable, the police threw tear gas canisters at them to disperse the crowd, which was disturbing people on the public highway, she added. Now, fierce fighting still ongoing in Sudan. No less than 12 civilians were killed on Sunday in bombardments by soldiers and paramilitaries who are now clashing in a new town in Darfur, a vast region in western Sudan that is constantly being fled by refugees. According to reports, the first provisional toll is 12 civilians killed in Nyaya, the capital of South Darfur, a doctor in the town said, according on condition of anonymity. But we know that some people were killed or wounded before they could reach a hospital, as the violence of the fighting is preventing people from moving around, he explained. According to the United Nations, since April 15th, the war between the army led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces RSF of General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo has left more than 2,800 people dead, according to the NGO ACLED, and more than 2.5 million displaced and refugees. One of the heaviest figures is undoubtedly that of El Guinea, the capital of West Darfur, where since the end of April, tribal fighters and civilians have mingled in fighting between the military and paramilitaries. There have been 1,100 deaths in this town, and above all, abuses that could constitute crimes against humanity, according to the United Nations. In the dirt streets of El Guinea, corpses hastily covered with clothes lay in the scorching sun, while the curtains of stores are down or have been ripped open by looters. In the maze, cohorts of families flee, dodging bullets along the 30 kilometers or so that separate them from neighboring Chad. Nearly 160,000 people have already fled there to escape the war in Sudan. Let's take a quick break. When I come back, I'll bring you more stories, particularly from Nigeria. You're welcome back. Talking Nigeria issues. United Kingdom awaits Tinubu's cabinet set for stronger ties. Richard Montgomery, the British High Commissioner to Nigeria, has said the United Kingdom UK is anticipating the appointment of ministers by President Bola Tinubu before taking measures to boost collaboration. Montgomery in Abuja at the weekend said the UK government had identified 6 areas in which both countries could strengthen cooperation and explore new areas to build open for mutual benefits. Meanwhile, President Tinubu will return to Nigeria on Tuesday, a day before the Salah celebrations. Barring any last-minute change, the president will spend the Salah holiday in Lagos State, his first official visit to the nation's commercial hub since his inauguration as the president on May 29th. This was confirmed by a presidency source yesterday. According to the source, an advance team has already been put in place ahead of the president's arrival to receive him in Lagos tomorrow. The envoy said that the UK is more interested in the bilateral ties with Nigeria, as informed by Tinubu's recent economic decisions. Tinubu on Friday concluded his official trip to Paris, during which he participated in the summit for a new global financing pact hosted by the French President Emmanuel Macron. The president used the opportunity of the summit to hold high-profile sideline meetings with fellow heads of state and government, war business leaders and chief executives of leading multilateral and development finance institutions from around the world. He was initially scheduled to be back in Abuja on Saturday, but proceeded to London, United Kingdom, UK for a short private visit. Dele Alike, the presidential media aide, in a statement, had announced that Tinubu will be back in the country in time for the Eid al-Kabir festival slated for Wednesday. And finally, on the news, 40% surge in vehicle duties worsens transport crunch. Fee of importing vehicles, including mass transit units and other imported commodities, could add by as much as 20% in the coming weeks, a direct effect of last week's 40% addition in the foreign exchange rates for clearing operations. The possibility, experts have cautioned, will worsen the fear of a commuting crisis and the imminent hike in the poverty level. They added that the surge will complicate the inflation outlook, especially as Nigerians still rely majorly on importation for vital consumption. The Nigeria Customs Service (NCS) official exchange rate on duties and levies on imported vehicles and other commodities was adjusted on Friday from 422.3 Naira per dollar to 589.45 Naira per dollar, translating to about 40% upward review. The new charges have taken effect across the board, with importers of goods awaiting clearing being compelled to cough out additional money to get their cargoes out of the ports. The review, which has elevated the least duty to 1.097 million naira, followed the recent foreign exchange rate convergence, which has raised the official rate from about 462 naira per dollar to near 800 naira per dollar. The duty FX rate surge stakeholders fear will spell doom for the transport sector, as well as importation, and worsen the poverty rate in the country, especially coming alongside fuel subsidy removal and planned hikes in electricity tariffs. The customs exchange rate has continued to rise due to weakening naira in the past 8 years. That has increased hardship for the masses and added the cost of production for manufacturers. The rate rose from 409 naira per dollar to 422.3 naira per dollar in 2022, while in 2021 the rate added from 381 naira per dollar. The preceding year saw the rate rise from 361 naira per dollar to 381 naira per dollar before climbing to 409 naira per dollar. In 2019, it rose from 306 naira per dollar to 326 naira per dollar. In 2016, the rate saw many reviews. In September, the NCS reduced the exchange rate from 316 naira per dollar to 306 naira per dollar, while in August, the rate rose from 282 naira per dollar to 313 naira per dollar. In June, the exchange rate grew from 197 naira to 282 naira. In 2015, it was reviewed upward from 158 naira per dollar to 197 naira per dollar. A recap of major stories says Australian courts reject Moscow's bid to stop embassy eviction, and Australia announces fresh $774 million aid to Ukraine. North Korea holds rallies condemning imperialist US. Moscow aims to control Wagner as Ukraine alleges gain. And 50 years after Vietnam War ended, its bombs still kill. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching. I remain Lois Tureki. Have a nice day.